Brian Balfour is a policy analyst with the Civitas Institute, here to talk about the House budget bill. Brian, what do you make? $19.3 billion. Let's start there. How does that compare historically with previous budgets?
Going back historically, it's about $500 million more than the budget year for 2007. So kind of from an overall spending perspective, takes us back just a few years. In backing up even further, a little more perspective, if you want to look at comparing what the House budget would spend compared to, for instance, 10 years ago what the state spent, it's a full 1/3 larger than 10 years ago and about 82% larger than state spending from 15 years ago. So a little bit of perspective on what we're talking about here with $19.3 billion.
Start with the funding side of this bill. No new sales tax and no extension of any sales tax. What kind of impact do you see that having on North Carolina and on state government?
Well, certainly in North Carolina, Governor Perdue, she's proposing applying 3/4 of the cent for the state sales tax, which was, of course, originally proposed to end this year. That would have an impact of just over $820 million. But I think, obviously, it's, in my opinion, much better to allow those to expire the way they originally were intended to, because $820 million, obviously, that's money coming out of the pockets of North Carolinians. And certainly now at a time where people still are continue to struggle because of the economy, it's not a good time to be reaching even further into people's pockets.
You see $800 million, that would be, if you follow the logic, back into the pockets of working people. Is a sales tax elimination more to help working folks pay the bills, or does it spur job creation and economic growth?
Well, certainly both. I mean, obviously, people who are struggling, they need to, the cost of living that we see is going up with groceries at the gas pump. Allowing people to keep more money in their pockets by ending this sales tax obviously makes it easier for people to make ends meet. And obviously, the more resources, the more money, the more capital there is in the private sector, that's what spurs, that's what's going to spur the rebound in the economy, the private sector, to create jobs.
The Republican budget writers want new fees. They say no new taxes, but there are many new fees on everything from foreclosure filing, speeding tickets. When is a fee a tax? When is it not a tax? Because I've heard Democrats call out the GOP on that.
Well, that's a lot of political posturing. I guess it depends on what side of the fee or tax you're on and what you call it. But certainly when we're talking about a fee and what the Republicans are proposing, we're talking about fees. It's kind of a fee for use. Like if you don't use something, then you won't have to pay for it. They're pretty much specific in nature for some of the items that you mentioned. And a tax is more broad in nature. Everyone has to pay the sales tax when they buy something, for instance, but not everyone is going to receive the same amount of services in return. So a fee is much more narrow, much more defined in terms of a fee-for-service basis.
Now, getting on the spending side of the House budget, Brian, start with the education budget, of course, the largest part of state spending, $1.2 or so billion cut. What will that do to public education?
Well, actually, that's a pretty big bone of contention right now. Some of the estimates coming out from, for example, the governor's office is talking about the number of positions that will be cut versus the House leadership talking about those positions to be much different. There's a pretty big, significant difference. The biggest focus in the House budget, it would be getting rid of positions for teachers' assistants in the K through 3 grade levels. There would still be some substantial amount of funding for that, but it would be much reduced to the levels they had built up over the last few years. So that's really the largest one, and I've seen estimates from anywhere from 8,000 to like 18,000 of these teacher assistants positions that would need to be eliminated versus the current year. So it's really, I think there needs to be more, probably a little more investigation, a little more details come out to try to find a more reasonable estimate.
Why can't you know that? I mean, it's dollars and cents, and it's accounting, and it's supposedly business people working on this budget. 8 to 8,000 is a broad estimate.
Yeah, exactly.
It's 100% difference.
You're exactly right, and that's one thing I'm trying to do is look into each of the estimates and see which are more reasonable. I think there's some disputes as to when you start factoring in natural turnover and attrition of workers, whether we're factoring that in or not. And then there's unfilled positions. Some people will define a position, even if no one's working in it, they'll still define it as a position. Others want to define that as well. No one's actually losing their job because the position is not currently filled.
Is that what you're seeing the Democrats are doing? Are they claiming unfilled jobs as being a layoff, you think?
Yeah, I think, to get those inflated numbers, certainly, I think they're trying to paint the worst case scenario for, again, political posturing purposes, trying to paint the worst case scenario in terms of the changes in personnel.
Speaking in the present, of course, the Senate will change this bill or modify it in some way, but as of this week, what will North Carolinians be getting in terms of a state government and services and schools if this budget were to pass unchanged?
Right. Well, I think, again, it would be maybe in terms of the per pupil funding and so forth, maybe drop back a couple of years, budget years. I haven't been able to drill down the specifics. But certainly what we've seen over the last, again, stepping back bigger picture, what we've seen over the last 5, 10, 15 years is a pretty dramatic increase in the amount of inputs going into the public education system. By that I mean more administrators, more teaching assistants, as we mentioned, smaller class sizes. But sadly, we're not really seeing translation in better results. So it'll be interesting to see if we scale back, just not even scaling back, but even slowing that growth rate of the inputs, if it really will have much of an impact, because sadly, we haven't really seen any of the results coming from all that spending on all those increased inputs into the system.
How sure is a budget that when it passes that there's a scientific outcome that will happen versus this is our theory, this is how we set our spending priorities, and we basically hope it works the way our philosophy believes it will?
Yeah, I think much more the latter that you're painting out. There's a theory. There's oftentimes an ideological bent behind people's differences in opinion on what should be spent, what amounts should be spent by government, what programs should exist, what the role of government should play. So it's really, I think it's nearly impossible to really have much of a scientific, analysis, drilling down to real base core statistical analysis of the impact of state spending.
I'll ask your opinion on this since you're with Civitas and you look at this budget. What's going to happen if, in your theory, if this lays out with the no sales tax, spending cuts and the like?
Well, certainly, if there's no tax increases, that will bode much better for the economy attempting to rebound here in North Carolina in terms of the amount of spending. Curtailing the growth rate of the spending as this state budget does. That obviously, from our perspective, is a good thing. We want to we advocate limited government. We want to keep more of our resources, more of our social interactions, quite frankly, in the private sector, the voluntary sector, versus introducing state government into that equation.
Ryan Balfour of the Civitas Institute, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, my pleasure.